Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Crowe, and distinguished members of the task force. I appreciate the efforts of this task force, and I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. July 13th was a failure of the Secret Service to adequately secure the Butler Farm Show site and protect President-elect Trump. That abject failure underscored critical gaps in Secret Service operations, and I recognize that we did not meet the expectations of the American public, Congress, and our protectees. And they rightly have that idea based on how we performed. President-elect Trump was wounded. A cowardly and despicable act killed one person and critically injured two others. And I join you and all Americans in condemning the horrific assault on President-elect Trump, Corey Comparator, James Copenhaver, and David Dutch. And I extend my deepest sympathies to the Comparator family. Since becoming acting director, I've worked tirelessly to address what I believe are shared goals with the task force, to understand what went wrong on the day of the attempted assassination, to ensure accountability, to prevent such a failure from ever happening again. The recently completed mission assurance inquiry thoroughly investigated the specific actions and inactions that led to the assassination attempt. 4 areas of deficiencies were identified: communications, protective advance processes, command and control processes, and coordination with external entities. The mission assurance inquiry identified failures by multiple employees that warrant disciplinary action. The quality of the advance work and preparation for the Butler Farm Show visit absolutely did not meet the expected standards of this agency. Let me be clear. There will be accountability, and that accountability is occurring. It is an extensive review that requires time to ensure due process. And the pace of this process, quite frankly, it does frustrate me. But it is essential that we recognize the gravity of our failure. I personally carry the weight of knowing that we almost lost a protectee, and our failure cost a father and husband his life. I have reflected extensively on the agency's substandard performance during the advance for the Butler rally. I have implemented numerous systemic and strategic changes to prevent these failures from ever happening again. It has been my singular focus to bring much-needed reform to the Secret Service, to be an agent of change, to challenge previous assumptions, and while doing so, also ensuring that the brave men and women of the Secret Service have the resources, leadership, and assets that they need to be successful in carrying out our protective mission. A full list of actions is itemized in my prepared testimony, but these changes have included providing the highest levels of Secret Service protection to President-elect Trump throughout the remainder of the presidential campaign, expanding the use of unmanned aerial systems for aerial observation at venues, expanding the use of counter-unmanned aerial systems technologies to mitigate the use of a UAS as a kinetic attack vector, expanding the use of ballistic countermeasures at Secret Service protected campaign sites, a directive to mandate unified command in a singular location for all protective sites, something that was not done on July 13th in Butler. We are operating in a heightened threat environment with expanding protection requirements, and this requires a shift in the Secret Service's levels of protection, readiness, and sustainability. The paradigm shift focuses on elevating protection, prioritizing training, strengthening our workforce, and increasing accountability. The elevation of protective operations ties directly to how the work performed by special agents in the field directly relates to our protective mission. The field offices serve a critical role in everything we do operationally, to include protection, protective intelligence investigations, and enforcement operations, among many other important responsibilities. Recognizing how operationally integrated that field offices are, I'm directing an organizational change to shift the Office of Investigations to the Office of Field Operations. This is not simply a semantic change. Establishing the Office of Field Operations is an opportunity to reset our thinking and perspective about the role field offices play in protection, and to enhance our operational effectiveness by better leveraging field offices to support, enable, and inform protection and protective activities. It is also my intention to reconstitute the Secret Service's culture such that training is routine and expected. That was how it was done when I was operational in the Presidential Protective Division, and somehow along the way, we became disproportionately operational in comparison to time allocated for training. As I have publicly stated, the Secret Service historically has had to manage its operations by doing more with less. That is not consistent with achieving a no-fail mission. And since becoming acting director, I've made it my priority to eliminate the do more with less mindset, which has had a long-term degrading effect on our workforce and our protective operations. The Secret Service is making progress on this thanks to Congress. The continuing resolution, which was passed in September, appropriated additional funding to the Secret Service in FY 2025 to support immediate requirements associated with protective operations. I greatly appreciate the efforts of Congress and numerous staff members in making that supplemental a reality. The world is a dangerous place. The responsibilities of the Secret Service are critical to the national security of the United States. It is important that decision makers fully recognize and appreciate the vital role and significance of the Secret Service in our nation's security. The terrorist, the nation-state actor, the sniper, the lone wolf gunman, they must be lucky once. But the men and women of the Secret Service must be perfect every time. That may not be fair, but that's the world in which we operate in. Thankfully, Congress has responded to the immediate challenges facing the Secret Service, and for that we are grateful. Our agency is not defined by one failure, but by our ability to learn from mistakes, to hold ourselves accountable, then learn, evolve, and continue striving for excellence. After the failure of July 13th, the dedicated men and women of the Secret Service rose to the occasion. In the face of immense pressure and adversity, they answered a call to duty with unwavering resolve. And I want to express my gratitude for the extraordinary dedication and hard work of our special agents, uniformed division officers, mission support personnel. They all persevered when the demands of the mission surpassed anything they or their families have ever been asked to take on. Their commitment to the mission, even under such challenging circumstances, is nothing short of inspiring. I am truly honored to serve alongside such a remarkable group of individuals. Mr. Chairman, I will submit the remainder of my statement for the record, and I look forward to answering the questions of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Rowe. I'm now going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. First, I want to thank you for your testimony. Of all the areas the Secret Service reviewed after July 13th, what do you think was the most concerning failure of that day, looking back on it? And had you been the one developing the game plan, what different moves would you have made strategically to ensure that it was a safe and secure area?
So I think what is glaring to me is the failure to recognize the significance of the AGR building, to recognize the significance of proximity to what was perceived to be the middle perimeter of the site. The lack of recognizing that, the failure to effectively communicate, as you stated, and some of the findings of the task force, to effectively communicate to local law enforcement that we need to have uniformed presence out here, that we shouldn't have people that close, unscreened, on the curtilage of our site, not having better line of sight mitigation, having something scrim along that fence line that was to the 3 o'clock, having uniformed law enforcement presence out there, having special attention measures by those law enforcement officers. That, to me, is glaring. And those are basic tenets, fundamentals of what advance teams are supposed to identify. They are supposed to identify hazards, risks, and then mitigate those risks effectively, either by using law enforcement and coordinating assets, or taking matters and making sure that it is mitigated and that risk is taken out of play. We did not do that on the 13th. Post July 13th, there was a renewed focus on that, making sure that supervisors were engaged, that we provided assets, that we had enabling UAS, platforms in the air. That was the difference on October 5th that you saw with your own eyes, sir.
You know, first of all, I want to thank you for your testimony. You know, of all the people that have weighed in on this, myself, my wife, 3 of my grandchildren, and 1 of my sons were there. I was on the grounds both on July 13th and October 5th. I want to reiterate what I said earlier. The difference is the difference between day and night. And my concern was, from the day the site was selected to when it was turned over to Secret Service, somehow that exchange, for whatever reason, the ability to coordinate the efforts between local law enforcement and federal agencies just seemed to be casual. I don't think local law enforcement knew enough about what was expected of them. I think that day they were doing what they thought they were supposed to do. And then afterwards, it's like, well, we should have communicated better. And I've got to tell you, from the beginning, I always was trying to figure out why 2 different command centers, and why weren't the 2 command centers even able to communicate with each other? Because at the end of the day, it's about communication. And as I've already said, we shouldn't have waited till 11 minutes after 6 that day to determine that we couldn't communicate. So going forward, you've already made some changes, and I think when you look at October the 5th, and this, to me, when I walked on the grounds that day, I felt like I was in the safest place in the world. The awareness of that, when you look back at it, and you were not in charge at that time on July 13th, but afterwards, the attention to detail that you put into effect on October the 5th, if you can share with us what we should do going forward, is there a protocol? Is there an ability to communicate? Is there an ability then to draw not only the federal agencies in, but also local agencies, because you can't cover the whole thing by yourselves. You just don't have enough personnel. You don't have enough assets. Going forward, I know you've already initiated plans like that. Just share a few of those with us, please.
Sure. So we've actually now we have done some organizational changes as well. I've created an aviation unit, right? So that's making sure that we're putting out those drones up in the sky to give us visibility. If we don't have a drone, or if for whatever reason a state or local wants to fly a drone, we're going to allow them to fly that drone as well. The whole point is to get, and this is what we did not have on July 13th, and it's one common operating picture. On October the 5th, we knew exactly where every law enforcement officer was because they were using a Blue Force tracker. We have that same platform. So having that domain awareness now moving forward at our protected sites, that is a change that we are operationalizing. We did this as part of our paradigm shift. We have to look at the threat and what that threat is. And our security model is based on that threat. And we have to prepare every day that there is somebody out there who's there to do harm. And that means that we have to communicate that to our state and local officers, and they are just as much of a partner at the table when we are developing that plan.
Okay, thank you. Listen, we could go on for a long time back and forth of what was there. I just will reiterate it. There is only one person on this panel in this room, unless other people came down from Butler, that was there that day. I was there that day. It was really messed up. I couldn't understand at all what was going on because it was unlike any other rally that I'd ever attended. I do know that you have so many protectees that are out there. The size and scope of your responsibility is beyond what the average American would understand. And I think by having these hearings, people are going to understand what is the purpose of the investment, why do we do it, and who all is it we're trying to protect. At this time, I'm going to turn over to Mr. Crowe. It's been wonderful working with him, and his military background exceeds anything I ever knew. So, Representative Crowe, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Acting Director, I wanted to actually pick up on that last line of questioning about the lack of a common operational picture and your reference to a Blue Force tracker. I mean, Blue Force trackers is something that I used a lot when I was a ranger in the military, because what we know is that when you're operating in a complex environment and you have multiple levels of agencies, you have local, state, federal, DOD assets, folks who don't always necessarily train and work together, but they're thrown together for a task force or a specific mission. And they're sometimes operating across vast distances and different geography. that common operational picture, right? One place where all communications flow, where there's unified command, where everyone can see where everyone else is, they can share information in real time, that is essential, right? In Afghanistan, for example, that's what we had. You know, we were oftentimes working with FBI, intelligence agencies, different countries across, you know, hundreds of kilometers in instances, but we had a platform, an actual physical platform that served as a virtual command post. So it doesn't matter where you were or who you were, you could look at that and see where everybody else was and share information. And it's just wild to me that in 2024, you know, our nation's premier law enforcement agency on July 13th was using text messages on their personal cell phones, literally sending emails in some cases to deliver real-time information and scribbling messages on paper and not using a system. So it's good to hear that you've implemented that in part on October 5th and going forward. But can you tell me, I mean, are you looking into more advanced systems and platforms that I know exist on the DoD side? I know DoD has these. Are you looking into these? Are you developing this? And can you commit today to pursuing and implementing that level of technology?
I will commit to that, Ranking Member, and we are actually looking at this. The whole basis of giving that domain awareness and superiority is exactly what you just described. And what my experience as a National Special Security Event coordinator in 2016, I was a coordinator for the RNC in Cleveland. When the Secret Service goes into planning for a National Special Security Event, we do this. We do exactly what it's called a multi-agency coordinating center. We have an incident log. We have a Blue Force tracker. We know where all our partners are. We should be able to do this, and we can do this on a smaller scale. And so I've taken entities, for example, our radio operations. I've taken them out of a line of business directorate, and I've put them more closely aligned to an operational entity. And that same operational entity, our technical security division, they also handle our cameras, our sensors, our aviation. So it's all about making sure that we're looking at things in DoD world, and we rely heavily on DoD for a lot of our overseas operations. Mm-hmm. And so they are already down the road with a lot of stuff, and we are leveraging those partnerships and leveraging some of the other commercially available off-the-shelf stuff that's available right now. That is FedRAMP, that we can bring it inside our system. We are doing that work right now, and there's about 2 or 3 different systems that we're looking at right now, and one of them is a DoD system.
Thank you. The last question I wanted to address was this issue of culture. And, you know, I'm struck by the fact that there were numerous things that occurred on July 13th, and I'll just list some examples. One was the counter-UAS operator. It did not have formal training on that system, and when it didn't operate, they just simply went without it being raised to anyone else's awareness. And the agent responsible for emplacing the counter sniper team placed the team that had responsibility for the sector that included the AGR rooftop, which is where the gunman fired from, placed it in a location where there was a tree blocking substantial portions of that rooftop, yet nobody said anything. You know, when I was in the Army, there was this culture and expectation that when you were on a mission or in a training range, that anybody could say something at any time if they saw a safety risk. You know, it's the old adage, if you see something, say something, right? So a private could stop a training mission or even a real mission if there was a life and safety issue. Commercial pilots have the same thing, that if you're in the cockpit, you know, anybody can say, hey, there's a problem to the captain or stop something from happening. I'm struck by the lack of that culture on July 13th, that if you're a counter sniper and you've been placed in a position that actually doesn't allow you to see entire sectors of the position that you're responsible for, why aren't people saying something? And it happened on numerous occasions. So can you speak to that culture and how you change that culture so that folks speak up and everybody's empowered to make necessary changes on the spot if they need to?
Sure. So first it starts with training, a retraining, right? A re-education of folks. We have to do that. Secondly, we also have to make sure that we are more regularly doing hot washes, after actions on this. So one of the organizational changes, I've directed the Office of Protective Operations to initiate and stand up almost an auditing capability, to regularly send out folks to evaluate how we're doing, and also share findings with our Office of Training. What we don't want to do is we want people to understand, hey, we want to get better. We're not here to take punitive action against people just to gig you for something. No, we want to make the mission better. We want to do that. We do this, again, in our National Special Security Event construct. It's in policy that coordinator has to do an after-action report. We do some of these things informally, but we have to do this regularly. We have to do after-action reports, and we have to retrain our folks to say, it's okay to see something and say, hey, wait a minute, why don't we have that hallway covered? I will tell you that my time as a full-time agent on the president's detail, that was the culture. I don't know where we lost that. But you were always empowered. If there were 31 poststanders on that site, there were 31 different site agents. And you had a shared collective responsibility, exactly what you're talking about, for the integrity of that site. We have to get back to that. And I think training, which touches everything from the cradle of your career all the way to the end of your career, training is where we need to make that investment.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like our videos and hit the bell icon to stay updated with the latest.